Hi everyone, and welcome back to Vanished Memories, a channel that's dedicated to getting out lesser-known true crime and missing persons cases. My name is Brianna, and today we're going to dive into the joint cases of Ted Haywood Wall and Harold Jeffery Mays, who went missing from North Carolina in 1980. If you are interested in this type of content, please subscribe, as I put out new videos every Wednesday. So I do have a few quick disclaimers before we start the video. Number one is this is my second time filming this video, as the first time I got pretty much all the way through and then realized that my mic was not recording, so sorry if my voice sounds a little bit off or if I seem a little bit tired. It's just taken me some time. Okay. Additionally, I do just want to let you know of a content warning before I fully delve into this case. Specifically, I will be mentioning the topic of drugs and selling drugs when I talk about the theories in today's case. Because of that, viewer discretion is, of course, advised. So, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video will be a joint missing persons case, so two missing men. That means that this video will definitely be quite long, as you can probably tell from the timestamp, but I do just want to give you a warning that there's going to be a lot of information in this video, especially when we get into the theories. That being said, let's get into the case. So this case involves two men, Ted Haywood Wall and Harold Jeffery Mays. These men were commercial fishermen who went on a fishing trip on the morning of November 13th, 1980. They left off the coast of North Carolina, specifically Cape Hatteras, and unfortunately were never seen again. Before I fully delve into what happened the day that they went missing, I do just want to give you some background about each of the men. However, I do just want to preface this by saying that there is a lot more information about one of the men than there is about the other, which I'll get into in more detail in just a moment. So the first man that I'm going to be talking about in today's case was 22-year-old Harold Jeffery Mays. This is the man who has a lot more information about him when you compare it to Ted Haywood Wall. Now, Harold Jeffery Mays was born in Ligonier, Pennsylvania in the late 1950s, though I was not able to find an exact birth date. He was born to parents Harold and Shirley Mays. It is known that Harold Jeffery Mays preferred to go by his middle name, Jeffrey or Jeff. So throughout the duration of this video, I will be calling him that, but I just wanted to make you aware. So, along with Jeff's father, Harold, and his mother, Shirley, it seems as though he also had a sister named Deborah. It seems that it may have been just the four of them, as I could not find any other siblings, but I do just want to make it aware that it could be possible that he has other siblings that I just wasn't able to find. Growing up, Jeff was described as the outdoorsy type, and he enjoyed staying active. While growing up in Ligonier, Pennsylvania, Jeff's father, Harold, actually started a very successful photography business. This business was actually located in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, which was about 10 to 20 miles away from where he would have lived in Ligonier, Pennsylvania. The business would eventually be sold to a company called Pacifico, and with the profits from that sale, his family would actually reinvest it into real estate in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Specifically, the family actually purchased a Coast Guard station, which I was not aware was possible, but I found very interesting. I will put the specific Coast Guard station that they purchased on screen now. Shirley, Jeff's mother, was quoted as saying, "We had purchased the Kitty Hawk Coast Guard station in 1970 and used it as a summer home." It seems as though shortly after Jeff graduated from Ligonier High School in 1977, his family actually relocated to North Carolina full-time. This time, however, they moved to Elizabeth City, North Carolina, which was where his mother, Shirley, was originally from. Only a few years after the family moved, Jeff's father, Harold, decided to purchase the Noonmakers Fish Co., which was a fish market as well as a retail store that was located on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Jeff did decide to attend college after high school, and he went to East Carolina University. However, it's said that he dropped out about 2 years later and decided to work full-time as a commercial fisherman for his father's business. So all of this information about Jeff takes us to the time where he would have gone missing. At the time, as I said, Jeff was 22 years old. He was approximately 5'10" and 175 pounds. He was also Caucasian and had wavy dark brown hair and hazel eyes. Now that we've talked about Jeff and a little bit about his background, we're going to move into Ted. Now, as I said previously, unfortunately there's not as much information about Ted, but I do have his physical description at the time that he went missing. Ted would have been born in the late 1950s, just like Jeff was. However, again, there's no known birth date available. At the time of Ted's disappearance, he was 21 years old. He was between 6'1" and 6'2" and weighed approximately 180 pounds. He also was Caucasian and had sandy brown hair and hazel eyes. It's not exactly said when Ted and Jeff met, but at the time of the disappearance of the both of them, they seemed to be friends who, like I said that day, chose to go on that fishing trip together. On the day of November 13th, 1980, Jeff and Ted would have likely set out early in the morning to do their fishing. This is pretty common for a lot of commercial fishermen. However, I was not able to find a specific time when they left, but know that it's likely that they did leave early in the morning in order to set out on their fishing trip that day. According to Jeff's mother, Shirley, it was a nice sunny day that day, and it seemed to be a perfect day for the two men to go fishing. So they would leave that morning on Jeff's boat. This was a 23-foot inboard-outboard Sea Ox commercial fishing boat. Unfortunately, I could not find a photo of the exact boat that they left on, but I will attach a photo of that same style boat on screen now. Additionally, I was able to find the vessel's registration number as well as a manufacturer number, so I will put that on screen as well as in the description box. So what's very interesting to note about the vessel that they left on that morning was the fact that the Sea Ox was specifically created as a commercial fishing boat that was virtually unsinkable. There are several sources that mention this fact. This vessel was deemed unsinkable due to the fact that the foam flotation within it would mean that even if the vessel was swamped with water, it would only be able to go just beneath the surface. It would not be able to sink much lower than that. In addition to the foam flotation, the boat also had a fiberglass center console, black outriggers, and beige sides. So the men were last seen on this boat at about 1:30 p.m., and they were seen about 16 miles southeast of the coast of Cape Hatteras, which is where they left from. They were seen by another fisherman who was out at this time because they actually needed help to repair and restart their engine on the boat. Reportedly, there were problems with the freeze plug specifically on this engine. The freeze plug is a part of the engine that would protect the engine block from the freezing cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean. As I said, the sighting by this other fisherman was the last time that Ted and Jeff would be seen alive. So now I want to get into the after effects of this case and what happened after the men went missing. Specifically, I want to talk about the coverage involved in their case, searches that were done, as well as law enforcement involvement, and family and friend involvement. It seems as though the U.S. Coast Guard is the agency that is responsible for Ted and Jeff's case. However, there were some discrepancies that I found when looking into the specifics of contacting the Coast Guard about this case. So I specifically used two databases, which are the Charlie Project as well as the Doe Network. And the Doe Network seems to have outdated information, with the number that they provided specifically not being in order anymore. So I'm going to actually add the contact information for the Coast Guard for this case from the Charlie Project on screen now, but I will add the Charlie Project's information as well as the Doe Network information into the description box below. So in regards to searches for the men, according to both NamUs and the Doe Network, the search for the men began around 9 p.m. that night. It's not explicitly said when the men were reported missing, but it would have had to be sometime between when they were expected home and when the search began. The search was very extensive and lasts for about 2 weeks. According to sources, it was reported that Coast Guard boats, Navy, Marine, Air Force, and Coast Guard helicopters were used in this search. And the search covered more than 211,000 miles of ocean. Unfortunately, even though this search was very extensive for the men, there was no sign of them or the boat that they went missing on. This is interesting to consider when you think about the fact that the Sea Ox, which is the boat that they were fishing from, was considered virtually unsinkable. So you'd think that there would be a sign of that boat out there somewhere. But in the last almost 5 decades since these men went missing, there has been no indication of the boat being found. According to sources, there was also virtually no evidence of the boat being on the water that day. According to the captain of the Dare County Sheriff's Office, there was no gas slick seen, no oil slick, and there were no coolers or life jackets found. Additionally, it seems as though even though this case is almost 5 decades old, there was quite a lot of media coverage, but unfortunately, a lot of the media coverage centered more around Jeff than it did Ted. It seems as though this might be due to the fact that Jeff's family was more involved in the media and in participating in interviews. Because of this, please be aware of the fact that the two theories that I'm about to explain to you revolve mostly around Jeff, even though Ted also disappeared under the same circumstances. So now we're going to get into the theories. Please be warned that both theories that I'm going to talk about are quite long and there's a lot of information, so do your best to stick with me. The first theory is what I'm going to call the drug involvement theory. So this is a theory, as the name might suggest, that the two men had gone missing due to involvement with selling drugs, and specifically debts that they owed. Before I fully delve into this theory, I just want to make it known that there is some negative speculation about Ted. This mostly comes from Jeff's family and friends, but this is not reflective of my opinion, and this is only information that I was able to pull from articles. Now, according to Jeff's friends and family, the two men had started to sell drugs in the off-season. It is said that this is fairly common in the fishing industry, at least during this time period, with fishermen often choosing to do this in order to financially compensate for the slack in the winter season. In an article that I found interviewing both Jeff's mother, Shirley, and his friend, Eric Krieger, I was able to find a quote from Eric that said, "In the winter, the commercial fishermen got into selling drugs. Back then, it was pretty heavy duty. Due to the fact that it was known that the men were selling drugs at the time, it's theorized that they may have done something in order to flee from someone who might have been after them for debts owed, or something could have happened to them to bring harm to them because of a debt that was owed." Even though it was known that both Jeff and Ted were selling drugs at the time, a lot of Jeff's family and friends believe that it was Ted who was the one that owed people money. Jeff's friend, Eric, was quoted as saying, "Jeff was hanging with Ted Wall, and I think Ted was over his head owing some people money." Additionally, it's been stated in both men's Doe Network profiles that Jeffery was hanging out with Ted Wall, and they, Jeffrey's family and friends, think Ted owed some people money. So, like I said, it's believed by most people, specifically Jeff's family and friends, that the men came to some harm or had to flee due to these debts that were owed. There's also another theory that comes out of this drug theory as well. So, according to Jeff's friend Eric, he actually believes that for some reason, the US Coast Guard is involved in a cover-up in this case. This is due to the fact that shortly after Jeff and Ted's disappearance, Eric was looking into the official Coast Guard report. Eric recalls reading in that report that there was a fisherman who had gave an account of seeing a boat that resembled the Sea Ox that day, fleeing very rapidly towards the southwest. This aligns with the drug theory, considering that it could be likely that the men fled very fast from someone that was trying to do them harm. Or alternatively, someone might have done them harm and then taken the boat and fled. So even though Eric specifically remembers reading that account from that fisherman that day, he says that when he went to go read the report again, the page was missing. Of course, it is possible that Eric could remember the quote incorrectly, but he does seem to think that this was actually some type of cover-up. So the article that mentioned this actually did reach out to the public affairs officer, Carrie Schaefer, of the US Coast Guard. When they reached out to her, she agreed to look more into the records to be able to clear up this confusion. She stated, "The Coast Guard is required to keep records of significant historical cases, or if the case is not historically significant, we send those cases to the district office in Portsmouth, Virginia." However, what is very weird about this, and does kind of align with a cover-up, is the fact that the next day, Carrie Schaefer called back the newspaper to report that she was unable to find these documents. She explained that the records were actually in the National Archive in Washington, D.C., since they are official government documents. She said that in order to gain these records, one would have to file a Freedom of Information Act form. When asked how long this would take, she stated that she did not know and it could be a few months. It is very odd for someone who is the head of public affairs for the US Coast Guard to have completely different information about records and gaining access to them in the span of 24 hours. So getting back more into the drug theory and the idea that the men could have fled for fear of their safety, there actually has been sightings of Jeff, and sightings that were actually specifically seen by Jeff's friend Eric and his mother Shirley. 6 years after the disappearance of the two men in 1986, Jeff's friend Eric actually decided to visit Jeff's mother at their home in the Outer Banks. At that time, he believed that he had seen Jeff. I'm going to specifically read his account word for word, so I will be looking down for a moment. So, Eric, Jeff's friend, was quoted as saying, "I was looking out the window and watching these two guys get out of two pickup trucks. These guys had long hair, jeans, big boots, and flannel shirts, and it was the end of May. They were talking and I was watching them when all of a sudden one guy whips out a pair of binoculars and looks up at the house. I thought I had seen a ghost." According to Eric, the man with the binoculars resembled Jeffrey, and that man started to walk towards the front door. He would say, "The guy is staring at me through the binoculars and I'm walking towards them. There's a girl in each truck and a dog in the back of each truck. The one guy drives up at the beach road. The other guy, who looked like Jeff, drove past me and waved. Jeff had a funny type of wave, and this guy waved exactly the same as Jeff." So obviously, as we can see from Eric's account, he fully believes that that man was Jeff, but it's not specifically stated whether he believes that the other man in the other pickup truck was Ted. However, I do think that it's worthwhile to assume that it might be Ted when you consider that, again, both of them went missing of the same circumstances. So this is the first sighting of Jeff and possibly Ted, but Eric thinks that there was also another incident that occurred that could have been Jeff as well. So Eric actually would buy the Mays summer home from the family in 1992, and he moved the structure south on the beach. 3 years later, on November 15th of 1995, there was a commercial fishing vessel named Mr. Big that had actually landed in the port of the Outer Banks. During the time that Mr. Big was docked at the Outer Banks, a photographer actually had captured a photo, and that photo showed 3 men on the deck of the boat. According to both Shirley and Eric, one of those men looked exactly like Jeffrey. Unfortunately, I do not have access to that photo. I did a lot of research to try to find it, but was unable to do so, and I'm led to believe that it was likely not published online anywhere. Alongside the docking of Mr. Big, there was also another very weird incidents that happened according to Eric. Again, I will be reading word for word his first-hand account, so I will be looking down at my notes. Eric would say about this incident, "When Mr. Big came into the Outer Banks, someone broke into the summer home, but they didn't break through the front door or the first floor. This person climbed up the second floor and was able to unlock a specially designed lock on the second floor door. There were only several people who knew about the lock on that door, the Mays family and me." What was also very odd about this break-in was the fact that there was nothing taken and there were also no damages done within the property. However, the person who broke in actually turned everything on. That was the lights, the ceiling fans, and alarm clocks. So Eric was quoted as saying, "The person knew where the electrical switches within the house were," which is very interesting. Eric states that he has come to the conclusion that Jeff might be living in Alaska, where the vessel Mr. Big had come from. He thinks that there is something that's preventing Jeff from coming home to see his family who he loved. This, again, of course, does align with the theory that Jeff and Ted had moved away due to the fact that they were scared of retribution from debts that they owed. So these sightings of Jeff and possibly of Ted are very compelling, but unfortunately nothing more really came of it. Jeff's friends and family definitely seem to believe that there is more to this case than lets on, and that Jeff is still alive somewhere safe and sound. Jeff's family and friends especially seem to believe that there is more to this case than meets the eye, and that Jeff is still out there, possibly in Alaska. Jeff's mother Shirley has said that she has dedicated her life now to finding her son. She actually has published a book called Outer Banks Piracy, Where Is My Son, Jeffrey? In the book, Shirley talks about the ideas of money laundering, power, greed, and drugs, which took place in the Outer Banks area at the time. And Shirley has also mentioned in an article about this case that there was an international drug deal going on at the time in 1980 and the late 1970s. So again, it adds a lot of validity to the drug theory. So this ends the drug theory, which is the most widely accepted theory in this case. However, I do think that's important to talk about one other theory, which is what I would call the shipwreck theory. So, like I said, this theory is definitely less popular than the drug theory. There are a few reasons why the theory of them shipwrecking is quite far-fetched. One of the main reasons is, as I said before, the Sea Ox was considered unsinkable. Because of that, it is quite odd to think that they could have shipwrecked, but no part of the boat was found. The weather on that day was known to be good. Additionally, there were other fishermen out on the water that day, and these fishermen were able to return home safely. However, I do think it is important to note one big thing about this case, which is the fact that the men were known to already have issues with their engine. Again, remember that at around 1:30 p.m., another fisherman on the water that day had to help them restart that engine. So it seems as though the main issue with the engine at the time was the freeze plug. And in doing more research on the freeze plug, there could be many issues that come from one not working properly. If the freeze plug was not functioning as it should, there could be catastrophic damage to the boat. This damage could include a cracked engine block, as well as cracked manifolds or cylinder heads. This could result in things ranging from leaks to overheating, potentially to completely ruining the engine. Because of this, even though the chances are very slim, it could have resulted in a wreck. Again, as I've said, this theory is very far-fetched. I am aware of that. However, there was some interesting information that I found regarding the area that they went missing from, and the fact that it's actually known as the Graveyard of the Atlantic. I'll try my best to put a map on screen of the Graveyard of the Atlantic and what it would have looked like and the ships that went missing from that area. However, the only picture that I could find was very large, so I might not be able to fit it on screen. But if that's the case, I will link it in the description box below so you can find that resource in your own time. So I was actually able to find that in the Graveyard of the Atlantic, there was actually known to be approximately between 3,000 and 5,000 shipwrecks. This would be along the 300-mile coast off the shore of Carolina, and these shipwrecks actually seem to be more frequent around the Outer Banks area. In looking into this phenomenon a little bit more, I was able to find a pretty significant reason as to why this area would facilitate so many shipwrecks over the years. This is due to the fact that the Graveyard of the Atlantic is situated right where the cold water current of the Northern Current, or the Labrador Current, and the warm water of the Gulf Stream meet at Cape Hatteras. At the intersection where these waters meet, there is temperature clash, which does cause for very good fishing, but poses a lot of potential hazards and uncertain weather events. Additionally, there is another hazard that Cape Hatteras possesses. This is known as the Diamond Shoals, which is a very large and shifting underwater sandbar system. Diamond Shoals is actually not just one large sandbar. It's actually 3 separate sandbars, which extend 14 miles to the east and south of Cape Hatteras. These sandbars are called Hatteras Shoal, Inner Diamond Shoal, and Outer Diamond Shoal. In between these shoals are sloughs or channels where the water is stagnant. What makes them even more dangerous is the fact that the depths and locations are constantly changing of these sloughs, since the ocean currents will shift sand beds and make navigating these shoals even more difficult for fishermen. So that was quite a lot of information about the ocean, just for me to say that even though this theory is a little bit far-fetched, I do think it's interesting to consider the fact that where they went missing is home to so many shipwrecks. Due to the fact that this area is known for its treacherous waters, it's possible, albeit very slightly possible, that Ted and Jeff were unfortunately unable to navigate that area safely. So those are the 2 theories that I had to present in this case. As I mentioned, there have been a few sightings of Jeff, specifically by his friend and his mother. There's also possibility for one of those sightings to include Ted if you think about the other man who was in the truck at the time that Eric saw Jeff waving to him. Before I fully end this case, I know that I've already gone into theories, but I did want to mention one more thing that I found. I just wasn't exactly sure where to put it in, but I thought it was very interesting. So I did find in an article from 2015 about this case, the article actually mentions the fact that there was letters sent to West Virginia police. They mention it specifically saying that it was a lead in the case, though unfortunately I couldn't really find any other information about these letters. I wasn't able to find the content of these letters, who the letters might have been written by or were meant for, or anything else about these letters. I did just want to mention that because, again, I thought it was interesting and worth sharing. So whether you subscribe to the more widely believed theory about the drug involvement, or subscribe to the theory about the shipwreck, it still is possible for both men to be alive and out there. Their families are of course still looking for them to this day, even if there is less involvement from Ted's family in the media. If you have any information about this case, even if it is older, please do not hesitate to reach out to the proper authorities. I again will have that information on screen now and in the description box. Thank you once again for tuning in to listen to the case of Ted Haywood Wall and Harold Jeffrey Mays. If you enjoyed learning about this case or found it educational, please don't hesitate to leave a like, comment, subscribe, or share the video. Again, my name is Brianna, and thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Vanished Memories.